Hi, everyone.
Hi, good
Um,
morning.
Good morning. If you have a minute, please drop your name and organization into the chat so I can prove how effective I am. Thank you so much. We're just going to give everybody a minute to start logging in. While we're waiting for everybody to join us, if you haven't dropped your name and organization into the chat yet, please go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to wait one more minute because sometimes people tend to come in just a minute later. So. All right, I'm going to get started so that we don't go over time and respect all the timing. And people can just join us as they come in. So if you don't know me, I am Kelsey Priest. I'm with Volunteer Maine and I'm a program officer here, and I operate under the Volunteer Generation Fund. And so I support all things in the general volunteerism scope. Michael Ashmore is here too. He focuses a little bit more on AmeriCorps, but also the volunteerism stuff. And so he will jump in and help me if I forget anything. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about service enterprise today. We have an orientation for service enterprise coming up at the end of this month that goes a lot more in depth about what it is and what to expect. But I wanted to give everybody here a little taste to see if it's something that could interest you or might be a good fit for your organization. Um, and currently we've been doing 2 cohorts a year. We're trying to get up to 3 cohorts a year. Your organization does this training with us and a couple other organizations, and we get to talk and chat and learn from each other. So if this is something that interests you, you think makes sense for your organization, then please join us. So I'll get started with that. And actually, oh, hold on. I'm going to actually stop sharing because I messed that up already. I'm going to start with a video. And I need to make sure that I share screen with sound. So let's do that correctly. Okay.
So you're sitting at your desk, and you're reviewing your list of tasks for the day. With each hour that passes, you mark one task off, and yet 2 more appear. You talk with your team, you talk with your boss, and everyone is having the same problem. As you look at your to-do list, you worry that you're not spending your time efficiently. Some of your responsibilities are foreign to you, and you feel like you're building a bicycle and riding it at the same time. Next month, you have to complete your department's annual budget. You carve out an hour every day to focus on it, but you're distracted by other projects, and math is not your strong suit. You think of your neighbor Sandra, an accountant, and wish she would suddenly appear to take on the responsibility. Now, consider she could appear. Imagine that Sandra, or someone like Sandra, had a role built into your organization to use her specific skill set to serve your organization. With her help, you would focus on what you're good at. You would feel like the work your team is doing is making a tangible contribution to your organization's mission, the same mission that attracted you to join the organization. By engaging Sandra and other skill-based volunteers, your organization could operate as a service enterprise. A service enterprise is an organization that fundamentally leverages volunteers and their skills to achieve its social mission. This means engaging volunteers in every area of your work, from direct service to operations to administration. Research conducted by TCC Group and Deloitte demonstrates that nonprofits operating as service enterprises outperform peer organizations on all measures of organizational capacity, thereby allowing these organizations to more effectively address community needs and operate at almost half the median budget. When an organization leverages volunteers and achieves an effective volunteer management model, not only do they lead and manage their organizations better, but they are also significantly more adaptable, sustainable, and better resourced to do their work, and therefore able to sustainably go to scale. Research conducted by Deloitte identified the following 10 characteristics as consistent and critical practices for nonprofit service enterprises. Planning and development. Developing a strategy and infrastructure for mission-driven volunteer engagement. Leadership support. Demonstrated executive commitment to volunteer engagement. Resource allocation. Allocation of resources, time, money, human capital, and tools to volunteer engagement. Tracking and evaluation. Determining service value, tracking volunteer retention, assessing the quality of volunteer experiences, and monitoring the outputs and outcomes of volunteers in meeting the mission of the organization through a volunteer tracking system. Outreach. Ongoing outreach and volunteer recruitment to sustain ongoing volunteer engagement. Funding. Fund development for volunteer engagement. Effective training. Train volunteers and the employees that manage them to effectively fill their positions. Onboarding and supervision. Matching volunteers to appropriate positions, clarifying their roles, orienting and supporting them throughout their time with the organization. Technology and communication. Using best practices in technology and communication to enhance volunteer engagement. Partnering to extend reach. Creating a participatory and mutually beneficial relationship with the community to increase community engagement and reach. The Service Enterprise Initiative is a California volunteer social innovation inspired by reimagining service and led by Points of Light. The Service Enterprise Initiative strengthens the capacity of organizations through a comprehensive research-based assessment, training, coaching, and certification model. Organizations introducing the initiative to agencies in their community are witnessing fundamental changes to how they are strategically engaging volunteers. This initiative is a collaborative effort made possible with the innovative leadership of California volunteers, California Volunteer Centers, the Corporation for National and Community Service, Points of Light, and the dedication of TCC Group, Algorithm, Deloitte, and RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service. To learn more about this initiative, go to www.pointsoflight.org/service-enterprise-initiative.
You ever wondered what?
Just give me a second. All right, so that's the intro to give you sort of an idea of what Service Enterprise is trying to accomplish, which is to help organizations really use volunteers to their best ability. And I'm trying to get this set up again, and for some reason it won't. Hold on. Okay. Share screen. I'm gonna share screen again. So I usually like to start off with like asking yourself, what are some things that either never get done or that you wish you could do in your organization, or maybe you're always scrambling to do? Or how can I engage more volunteers in the work that we do? You want more community engagement, you want more people to be involved, or what do you do with those community members who approach you that have like a really specific skill set that could potentially really benefit your organization? The service enterprise model can help with that. So why service enterprise? Why is this the way that we do it? So besides the fact that it is actually based in research and not just Michael and I saying this is cool, it's actually based in research and there's reasoning behind it. All organizational capacities are significantly and markedly stronger for nonprofits with a strong volunteer management model. And when we say significantly and markedly stronger, that's statistically significantly, and markedly stronger as in there's numbers to show that. So not just they feel better about it, but statistically they are better at it. When organizations engage and manage any numbers of volunteer well, they are significantly better led and managed. So if you know how to manage volunteers well and you're good at that, you also manage your paid staff well, and that reflects in how you manage the organization as a whole. They are also significantly more adaptable, sustainable, and capable of going to scale. I think if COVID taught us much of anything, sometimes organizations need to scale up or down or to the side very quickly. And when you can manage your volunteers well and manage your paid staff well, you're able to do that a lot more effectively. That also falls into the area of human resource management. So if you are operating as a service enterprise, you are required to have a strong and well-developed human resources practice in your organization, which in general can just help, again, with that paid staff, and then your volunteer, you're managed better. And then organizations that engage volunteers are equally as effective as their peers without volunteers, but at almost half the median budget. So what we say with that is, with the same amount of money, they can accomplish twice as much or operate with half the budget and still produce the same amount of support or produce the same amount of results. Also, 80% of volunteer enterprise organizations report an increase in both volunteers and skilled-based volunteers, which does increase the capacity to deliver on their mission. And then the research by Reimagining Services shows that for every $1 invested in volunteer management, the return on investment can be between $3 and $6, which is a really good return on investment, especially when you are working on budget in your organization. So what does like a commitment of service enterprise look like? What are we asking if you decide that this is something you want to delve into? So we're going to have an orientation on June 29th, 9 a.m. This is a good place if you want to get more information, or you think this might be good for your organization and you want your leadership to get involved. We are going to record it. So like if this time doesn't work for you or leadership, we can get it out. And so you don't need to stress about that, but if you come, you can ask the questions, and that's always helpful. Then once you're committed and you say, yeah, this is a direction we want to go, 3 or more people from your organization participate in what is called a service enterprise diagnostic. Basically, you get a link that asks that gets sent out to the people who have signed up for the service prize diagnostic, or as we call it, the SED. And it just asks a bunch of questions about the volunteers and like the volunteers that those people interact with, to get a snapshot of what's going on in your organization. And then it will give you a score where you fall on the service enterprise spectrum, if you're doing great or if you have certain areas that you need to work on. And it breaks it down by the 10 characteristics that you saw in the video. It shows you where you're scoring really high and where your organization could use some work. And so it gives you that picture of the areas that you need to work on. And so once that happens, then we kick off the training in August. There's 7 sessions. We usually do them Fridays. They're 2.5 hours. They're mostly sequentially. There are a couple times that we have breaks in between because you have some homework and you have some things to do in between. So it's not necessarily every week, but it is pretty consistently on those Fridays. And then after the cohort training, when we've ended, you've been working in your team and you've been figuring out sort of a game plan. Part of this is that you have a workbook that shows you ways to improve in certain areas, and you're working on that workbook. And so you leave us and you spend the next few months figuring out your game plan on how to improve those different characteristics. And once you've sort of implemented those changes, you come back to Michael and I and you say, we're ready to be certified. And we come by and we check out everything. And that might sound sort of scary, but in that whole process, Michael and I are available to talk. We can have regular meetings. We can help you sort of develop that plan to improve in those areas. So it's not like a big surprise, like you have to come back to us in a month and be ready. Sometimes this can take a year. It could take longer than a year to really get those changes. But Michael and I are here to help every step of the way. So it doesn't need to be as scary. And I do want to say that like the certification process, it does require like a large organizational change. Like a lot of times you are asking organizations to make process changes, you're asking people to change part of their job description. It can be a big shift in an organization, and it really works best and is most effective when your organization leaders are involved. And so if this is something that sounds really interesting to you as like a volunteer manager or someone who works with volunteers a lot, there is a lot that you can get out of this training, but to implement it and to be really effective, the people who make those sort of processes, changes and thoughts need to be involved and should probably come to the training at the very end, at the very least be part of the orientation so they know what you're doing, but they should be a part of it and need to have that information. That went a lot faster than I thought. So any questions? I sort of threw, and Michael's probably got a lot of stuff that I missed, but any questions to kick off everything that I sort of threw at you? Michael, what did I miss?
Didn't miss anything. I just talk fast.
Sure.
I think that a really key point is that service enterprise is an organizational strategic growth model. It's not come to the training and implement a few things. It's fundamentally a self-examination of your business practices and at what level you incorporate volunteerism into the work your organization does. And so that's why Kelsey was emphasizing the idea that leadership needs to be involved. A typical planning or service enterprise team involves board members, someone from upper leadership, key volunteers, people that work on the staff that manage volunteers, and even recipients of service. It's really the idea is to get a team together to thoughtfully consider where the organization could benefit from skilled volunteerism in a way that it isn't already. Typically in organizations, even ones that have really good volunteer management practices, they often don't think, they often have a volunteer board, and then they have a set of volunteers that sort of do a direct service role. And there's if you think about an organizational chart, there's often a place in the middle where there are positions that could be supported or filled by volunteer staff, and organizations often just don't think that way. Human resources or staff are considered paid, and volunteers are considered nice. And service enterprise gets you to think about staff as a group of people that are both paid and unpaid that all work together to achieve your mission. So there's a question in the chat: would this be valuable for a very small volunteer-only 3-year-old nonprofit? Sure, it could be really transformative. And
especially since you're so new, you will have less resistance to change because they haven't done it for 30 years. I think that could actually be one of your strengths, is that you're kind of new, personally.
If you're all volunteer, of course, then you don't necessarily have the distinction between paid and unpaid staff. But, as a young organization, you may be thinking about development strategies that lead to some paid volunteer or some paid staff, and how would that fit in? And this is a way of thinking about that as well. So Mary Hadlock is on the call, and she's gone through the training with a very large organization that has multiple divisions. And so I don't know if Mary wants to, besides the technical challenges of actually getting certified when you've gone through training just before COVID hits and you have to deal with the national organization. But beyond that, if you want to just offer something, Mary, about how you saw the training, warts and all, we're happy to have you share.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Michael. Appreciate that. No, I am the RSVP director at Southern Maine Agency on Aging. We have approximately 400 plus volunteers in our RSVP program. We do work with volunteers that are under age 55, and I'm assuming all of you are familiar with RSVP. But we did go through the training several years ago. It was very beneficial. And I found that the SED was especially helpful in seeing where we were already within our agency, where we're already meeting some of those initiatives, and where we needed to work on. And so that was definitely beneficial. But since that time, there was a lot of work. We had a consultant work with us that was very helpful, step by step in going through the application process for the program. But I think what we most benefited from was to identify areas where we could leverage these volunteers. And so we're able to create positions in conjunction with staff for volunteers that would act as leaders and mentors to other volunteers, and free up the time for staff. So that was essentially important. And this is ongoing. It doesn't just stop after the training. This is something we continue to strive to meet the needs of staff along with our volunteers. But certainly I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything. Sorry for using the acronyms.
Okay.
We all do that.
Yeah.
So I just thought, oh yeah, for people that aren't familiar, it probably makes sense to have the SED.
Yeah, I would make
explain.
one suggestion that we had one or two volunteers initially participate, but I think it would be beneficial that if you're going through the training to have your volunteers participate as well. That was something that we had staff on board, but I think it would be beneficial if you had a volunteer that was, playing a large role in any part of your organization, to invite them to join the training. We're looking forward to having staff redo some of the training coming up in September. So.
Great. Great. Sandy, do you want to clarify your question? Is volunteer turnover frustrating? Is that a question for Mary, and specifically about what she mentioned with like mentor volunteers? She might have to type. I don't know if her microphone's working. Once you train mentor volunteers and they leave. Yeah.
So Mary, how have you coped with volunteer turnover when you're putting volunteers in key roles, particularly training others?
Sorry, my phone was ringing in the background, so I went back on mute. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime that you've spent a lot of time training a volunteer, it's frustrating if they decide to leave, but, remembering that they are volunteers and things such as a pandemic come up, and, things happen. But, what we look at again is always being able to kind of identify a volunteer as a backup. That's what we do in many of our programs. We look at already, potentially having these volunteers step into that role. If for some reason the volunteer needs to step up, who would be a good replacement for that volunteer? So fortunately, we have a pretty high sustainability rate for our volunteers. And I believe so long as they're engaged and challenged and appreciated, that you will have a high sustainability rate with your volunteers. In the constant surveying and speaking with them. Paul is my colleague here at Southern Maine Agency on Aging. And Paul, if you have anything to add, please feel free to jump in.
No, I have nothing to add. You've done a great job of explaining the model and my understanding of it. I hope to learn more of it as I work with the agency a little bit more, but yeah, seeing a lot of volunteers in key roles is a huge benefit, and just seeing all that they do. We're actually organizing a focus group with some of our most important volunteers to see how we can engage more volunteers to do more within the agency, and they're all stepping up to the plate and signing up for that focus group. So it's been cool to see the kind of outreach that this service enterprise model has.
I think one of the other things, Sandy, is service enterprise help or service enterprise training. Service enterprise is a state of being, right? It's not a brand. It's not a brand, or you either operate as a service enterprise or you don't. So it's a descriptive term. But what the service enterprise training does is it helps, I think, surface and identify issues that contribute to volunteer turnover. If you look at those 10 characteristics, leadership support is absolutely critical. Tracking and evaluating your volunteer programming and getting feedback to volunteers. Effective training and the onboarding and the supervision are all key contributors. Technology and communications help to, support volunteers in the work that they do in a variety of ways. And what Service Enterprise does is it helps organizations self-examine and figure out, what are the things that we do really well? What are the areas that we have for growth? And what are very specific suggestions that the research indicates would be useful if you have an area for growth? So I don't know what level I'm participating at.
Oh, I can make you co-host, Michael.
Let me just share real quickly a sample of a SED. Hang on, you're still listed as you've disabled screen sharing.
No, I didn't.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, here we go.
Liar.
And that's working now. It's working now. Okay, so here's an example from an organization that took the SED back a couple years, 4 years ago now. So their overall score is 77 out of 100, and as you can see, it says based on the preliminary information. And the thing about the service enterprise diagnostic is you get it at the beginning. So often organizations actually don't know enough about their own volunteer programs to complete it accurately, which is why it's done by a whole group of individuals related to the organization to try and, because someone in leadership and someone who's a manager or volunteer and a volunteer themselves might have really different perspectives on how well the volunteer program is running. And so the SED takes all those viewpoints and amalgamates them, aggregates them. So, but then within that, there are these 10 characteristics. There's also a peer group. So the organization is matched up with organizations that invest as much as they do in volunteer management, that are a certain size, have certain numbers of volunteers and certain types of volunteers. So there are 3 different peer groups. And so the suggestions and the relative importance of those 10 characteristics are different depending on which peer group you end up in. So then they look at each characteristic, and I realize that this is pretty text heavy, and I apologize for that. But you'll see the colored areas. Each characteristic is coded as an area of strength, caution, or needing improvement. And then you get literally a score for each of the characteristics. So characteristic 1 is planning and development, and they're saying, well, developing a strategy and infrastructure is the key element, and they're right in the middle, right? It's not a huge area for need, but it's not an area where they're excelling yet. And so then you get specific recommendations around how to improve these scores, and also linked specific resources, which are updated every year by Points of Light. And then, the next characteristic, leadership support, this is an area where they're already operating as a service enterprise, but you still get recommendations. And so each characteristic is fleshed out this way. And then what we do in the training over the roughly 20 hours of training that you receive is help focus on each of these characteristics with specific suggestions and quite frankly, lots of homework where your team goes back and digs into these different aspects and develops an action plan. And ultimately, what the process is to both examine your practice, develop an action plan for areas where you want to move forward or grow or change, and then go through the process of implementing the items in the action plan. And it's done by this planning team outside of the training. And then the certification process is an examination of the progress you've made on your action plan over whatever length of time you need to complete it. There are organizations that come in and they're already operating really close or right at service enterprise, and the action planning is shorter. We have organizations that spend a year or more continuing to work through it. And we have some organizations that find out through the SED and through the service enterprise work that they have a lot of room to grow. And so they're not ready for certification. And they start by taking the lessons of the training and going from there. And their initial goal might have been certification, but then they recognize, well, we're going to put that off for a while, and we'll circle back and we'll do another service enterprise training later when we've done some additional groundwork. So ultimately, the training is about a comprehensive model for effective volunteer management and incorporation of volunteers in your activities. That's what service enterprises do. And what you can do with that and where you can go with that is largely up to the effort and energy that you want to put into this. So unlike go to the one-day conference and get some ideas and bring them back and talk to people about them, this is optimally an organization that says, let's do what we do better, and let's really examine our practices and grow from that. And this is a structured opportunity to do that.
I think something else that happens too is people take the SED and they feel good, and then they take the training and they go, ooh, maybe we aren't doing such a great job. The last cohort we did, we found an organization who was like, I don't think we're actually capturing all of our volunteer hours. And so just, it's definitely like, even if you come out with like a great score and you're thinking, we got this, sometimes you come out going, actually, I don't know that we are, or it can highlight things for you that like, maybe you just didn't even realize it wasn't going the way you thought. And so I think it can be really beneficial for groups to take it, even if they think they're highly operating at a high level. It can point out a few things that you can still improve on. So I think it's a great training. I would recommend it.
And there's
I
other
will-
cool benefits, like you get this cohort effect, which is
Right.
why it's really great to have 4 or 5 or even 6 organizations in the training at a time, because often they're different sizes, different scales. You might have the small all volunteer organization and somebody much larger, like Southern Maine Area Agency on Aging, and that gives really different perspectives. And in one case, we have 2 like organizations serving similar populations, one in Southern Maine and one in Central Maine, that are now merged into a single organization after taking the service enterprise training together. We didn't have anything to do with that, but the fact that they got to do some planning together, I think was a spark that initiated a much bigger conversation.
Yeah. And then we had a question about the cost. The only cost is for the SED, and then the training is it's on us. Your benefit.
Yeah, let me unpack that a little bit though, because there is a cost. There is a cost. Service enterprise training costs about $8,000 per organization. What the Volunteer Maine has done is we've secured grant funding to help move the service enterprise needle in the state. And so what happens is we pay the cost for you. The amount of materials, the licensing of the intellectual property, the time that the staff puts into both adapting the training to the state of Maine and putting in the hours for the training itself, and then the consulting hours that go after it is all covered by this grant funding. So what we are currently asking of participants is to pay the cost of the SED assessment, which is about $300, and then not have to pay the between $5,000 and $8,000 that this training costs in other parts of the country. And why are we doing that? Well, because for a very long time, 26 years, Volunteer Maine has trained managers of volunteers. And we do that pretty well. I think those of you that have participated in our trainings and opportunities like this find it very valuable. What we discovered in that time is that while we have added capacity to individuals, we often have small or minimal effect on the organizations that hire those individuals. That volunteer managers move between positions, and that knowledge and skill is lost, and that often organizations don't really take their volunteer management opportunities as seriously as they could in order to get as much out of it as possible. I can't tell you how many times we've had volunteer managers say, "Oh my God, this service enterprise is like the best idea ever. Let's do that." And they go to upper management, and upper management says, 20 hours, nobody has time to do that. Volunteers are free and we don't have to worry about them. And the volunteer manager comes back and says, well, we're not going to participate in the cohort because the organization isn't really ready to think about volunteers as something other than some free labor that, well, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in the training that covers the sort of ways that organizations approach volunteers, many of which are really great and others which are not conducive to long-term growth. So, what's nice about this opportunity is that you do get to really unpack what it means to be an organization that utilizes the skills, the high level of skills in the population, and the amazing benefit that volunteers bring, because they've chosen you. They're passionate about what you do walking in the door, right? They're not just looking for a paycheck or looking for, or keeping the same job because it's secure and rents are high and, it's hard to deal with switching jobs and stuff. Everybody who comes to volunteer for you is already convinced that your mission matters. And that's a huge resource that is underutilized by organizations. The fact that people have chosen them and are willing to come and provide money, really, because time is money, to back that up. Like, this is people who are in effect paying you to do your mission work instead of the opposite, where you're paying other people to do that work. And that's a really different perspective on what volunteers offer. So service enterprise, again, helps us look at that through that frame. And we think it matters in the state of Maine, and we would like to see more of it. And so we have spent, a number of years pulling these grant funds down in order to try and get to a point where service enterprise reaches a tipping point in the state, where instead of being something unusual that no one's ever heard of, that there are enough organizations that have participated that it starts to become, oh yeah, that's a good way to improve volunteer management, which is ultimately our mission in the state of Maine. And, nicely, it would be really great also if we can get to the point where funders see service enterprises as more worthy of support because they're more efficient, because they get more done with less money. We work with funders around the state in that regard too. The United Ways are helping with this idea of encouraging people to become more efficient through service enterprise. And some of the private foundations are also looking at service enterprise as a way to increase the impact that their money potentially has. So it's a development strategy as well.
And I'll throw out there too, as Michael mentioned, we are doing in the virtual. We started doing that basically as COVID hit. Before it was in person, we are able to do in person. And in theory, if there was a cohort that was geographically compatible, maybe your organization, maybe a couple of your partners, or just other in your area, if you think an in-person one would be more effective. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 4 trainings when it's in person,
right? They're longer.
They're longer, and but you're together and it's a little less screen time. So if that's something that's interesting to you, we wouldn't necessarily do it for a single organization to just come and do that, but if you knew of a few organizations in your area, we have been interested in wanting to get back in person, because there are exercises and things that we do that just tend to work better when you're in person, and there's just a little bit better conversation when you're in person. But the benefits, as we all know, of Zoom is that anybody from all over the state can join in, so we don't have to worry about the geographic differences in that. So we'll probably continue to do that as well, but that's just something to keep in mind. If you and 2 or 3 other partners are sort of interested in that, we can also make that work potentially.
Yeah, sort of a regional cohort idea where people don't have to travel too far, but we've done that in the past where organizations take turns hosting, so that one organization in Brunswick will host, and then another, in Bath will host, and then another that's in Topsom will host, and we'll get it's not too far to travel, but everybody gets to participate and be in the same room, which there is, I think the piece about the inter-cohort work is better in person. I think, the content of the training isn't that much different, but being able to mix and match groups is a little bit easier in person. I think there's a few less barriers. We can mix and match people in Zoom groups, but I think it takes a little longer to get to know everybody through the Zoom windows, and being in the same room and sharing some lunch and having an opportunity to have coffee together in those side conversations, which doesn't happen in Zoom, makes the difference. So Sandy has a question: is there current grant funds available? Yeah, so the way this works is you decide to sign up for service enterprise, and other than that $300 for the diagnostic, you don't have to pay for it. We do it. We cover all the costs. So it's not a grant we give to you. It's not a grant we give to you. It's training, time, and energy that we give to you. But which is,
Michael and I are just happy to be here, so
someone's paying our salaries, so our time for training is covered by those grants.
Yeah.
Other questions or?
Great. Well, I'll definitely be sending out the link to the orientation meeting, a meeting invite. I'll be sending that out by the end of this week, if not today. And then in general, if you have questions or if you mention this to leadership in your organization and they want to know more, right now, or they want to get in contact with us, we're always available to jump on the phone or a Zoom call with somebody. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have specific questions or
you just want to know more.
you just want to know more. Yeah. We're happy to do this whole spiel again for somebody else in your organization. That's totally fine. We're just happy to be here. Okay. Great. Yes, Sandy, I will also send the recording. Yeah, I'm going to post the recording and I'll probably send that out to the whole network. There were a lot of people who said that they were interested but couldn't come, so that's why I recorded. So yes, the recording will also be included in that email. Well, we only have.
Well, I guess one other thing just to mention is that the way the timing typically works out with this is we do the orientation and then we have 6 weeks to 2 months because organizations have to do the SED process. They have to get people in their organization together. Those individuals they don't have to do it together, but they each have to have a link and they go and they do the surveys, and it takes a while to compile all that. And then it's processed and the SED is returned. And then we actually come out or via Zoom, unpack your results with you. We don't just dump it on you and say, here's your grade for the semester. In red letters. So
Michael was a teacher, so he's kind of used to it, but he won't do that to you.
So we come and we talk with you individually with your organization about your SED, and then the cohort trainings start. And so typically, as Kelsey described, they're weekly with a couple that are 2 weeks apart because the homework is a little more detailed. But those take place over a couple months. And then you've got your action plan fleshed out and you take that, and then there's sort of the work you do by yourself with individual consultancy and assistance from us. So it's a longer process with the training sort of in the middle. So orientation, then there's, yes, we're interested, we want to do a SED. Then, 6 weeks to 2 months later, we start the training and then we finish the training. And then there's the individualized work to do the action plan leading up to certification, if that's where you end up. So that's sort of the bigger picture timeline.
Okay. So no more questions, but if you think of any, please contact us. I do have like a couple announcements to make. Except now I lost it. Okay. The conference, we have the Maine Volunteer Leadership Conference, not mixing that up with anything else. That is in October. So save that on your calendar for October 11th. You should go. But also, if you are interested in presenting, we have a long form presentation that's about 1 hour and 15 minutes. So if you think you have some great information to share and you want to do a presentation, please you should sign up. The other thing that we are doing is like a short form. I'm calling them TED Talks. It's not like officially a TED Talk, but it's a small, shorter, rapid fire presentations that if you have something interesting to talk about, but you only need about 5 minutes to say it, that could also be something that we're looking for. And that can be pretty diverse. I mean, all of these can be pretty diverse in their what you're speaking about, but I just dropped in the form there. And if you do a session for us, you get to go to the rest of the conference for free. And if you do the short form, you get a half price discount for the conference. So nice benefits. Faiza Venente is going to be our keynote. And if you don't know who she is the executive director for the certification in volunteer administration. And then she also does some work with MAVA. She's been in volunteer management for a hot minute, and she's really great. She has a lot of great insight into volunteer management and how to engage them in communities. And so I'm really excited. She's come all the way from California. So yeah, if you have some interesting thoughts, please share them. I just dropped in the link for that. So save the date and sign up for that. Michael, is there anything you want to share? You're muted.
If you want to be on the planning committee to help
That's true.
organize the conference, Kelsey would
Yes.
love to have some extra voices jump in and
Yeah.
participate in setting up the conference. So just let her know, and it's always fun. You get to meet interesting people, and if it's not in your skill set to do large scale conference organization and design, it's a great learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And
any insight is great for us because we're always trying to make sure that everybody has something, everybody gets something to offer. So great. Yes, thank you. And as always, I usually plug that if you have questions about AmeriCorps, Michael's your guy. If you ever think you have a project that might be right for AmeriCorps, he knows all about all the different programs. So feel free to reach out to either myself or Michael and we can get you connected. I'll plug that till the end of my days. So okay, unless there's any other questions, you're free to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Any questions, contact us and I'll send out the link or the meeting invite for orientation. Thank you.
thank you guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks so much, both of
Always
you.
happy to do it. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you.
Thanks, Paul.
Sandy, Haley. See ya.